The blood-red sunrise spilled across the Wyoming prairie as Tamara Adler clutched her daughter's hand, watching flames devour the only home she'd known for the past 8 years. The fire consumed everything: her husband's clothes, their wedding portrait, the cradle where both their children had slept. But James wasn't coming back to wear those clothes, and little Samuel would never again sleep in that cradle. Now it was just her and 5-year-old Rebecca, standing before the smoldering ruins of the Adler homestead in the autumn of 1876. "Mama," Rebecca's small voice quivered. "Where will we sleep tonight?" Tamara fought back tears. At 27, she'd already lost more than most women twice her age: her husband to a mining accident 6 months prior, her infant son to fever just 3 weeks ago. And now they're home to what the neighbors called a tragic accident, though she suspected the banker who'd been pressuring her to sell had something to do with it. "Georgetown," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "We're going to Georgetown." Georgetown, Colorado wasn't just a mining town 60 miles east, it was the last place she had family. Her cousin Lillian had written after James died, offering a place to stay. Tamara had refused, determined to keep the homestead running. Now, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the few valuables she'd managed to save, she had no choice. "Will Uncle Thomas be there?" Rebecca asked, referring to Lillian's husband. "Yes, sweetheart, and you'll have cousins to play with." Tamara forced brightness into her voice, though her heart felt leaden. Georgetown meant admitting defeat, meant facing the pitying stares of strangers who would see nothing but a widow with a child and whisper about her misfortune. 2 days later, they boarded a stagecoach headed east. Rebecca pressed her face to the window, fascinated by the changing landscape, while Tamara clutched their small bag of belongings. Inside were James's pocket watch, Samuel's christening gown, and $63, all that remained of their life together. The journey was arduous. Tamara held Rebecca close during the bumpy sections, whispering stories to distract her from the dust and the cramped quarters. They shared the stage with a traveling salesman who talked incessantly about patent medicines, and an elderly couple returning from visiting their son in Utah Territory. "Lost your place, did you?" the elderly woman asked, noticing Tamara's worn expression and simple black dress. "Yes." Tamara kept her answer brief, unwilling to invite further questions. "Terrible shame. These are hard times for a woman alone." The woman nodded sympathetically. "My sister was widowed young, remarried within the year to a shopkeeper, not much to look at but steady employment. You'll want to do the same, I expect." Tamara looked away. Marriage was the furthest thing from her mind. She'd loved James deeply, his crooked smile, his unwavering faith in their future, even his stubborn insistence on building their house larger than they needed, for all the children we'll have. The thought of replacing him with some stranger for financial security made her stomach turn. "Mama, I'm hungry," Rebecca whispered, saving Tamara from having to respond. They arrived in Georgetown as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling mining town. Nestled in a narrow valley with mountains rising dramatically on both sides, Georgetown was larger than Tamara remembered from her one previous visit. Silver mines had brought prosperity and growth, with new buildings lining the main street and construction happening on the outskirts. Lillian met them at the stagecoach stop, her friendly face breaking into a smile that couldn't quite hide her shock at Tamara's gaunt appearance. "Oh, Tamara," she said, embracing her cousin tightly. "You're here now. Everything will be better." Tamara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Nothing would be better. James was still dead. Samuel was still dead. Their home was still ashes. But she had Rebecca to think of, so she straightened her shoulders and followed Lillian to the wagon waiting nearby. Lillian and Thomas lived in a comfortable 2-story house with their 3 children. They gave Tamara and Rebecca a room on the 2nd floor that overlooked the street, with a small bed they would share and a chest of drawers for the few belongings they had. "It's not much," Lillian apologized, "but it's yours for as long as you need." "It's more than enough," Tamara replied. I'll find work soon. I don't intend to be a burden. Nonsense. Family isn't a burden. Lillian patted her arm. Rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to think about what comes next. But Tamara couldn't rest. After Rebecca fell asleep, she sat by the window, watching the lamp-lit street below. Men stumbled out of saloons, their laughter floating up to her window. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A woman in a brightly colored dress stood in a doorway, calling to passers-by. Georgetown was alive with possibilities and dangers, none of which included the life she'd planned with James. Tamara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself, just for a moment, to cry silently for everything she had lost. Morning brought with it the resolve to move forward. Tamara rose early, washed in the basin of cool water, and pinned her dark hair into a severe bun. Her black dress was worn but clean, and she held herself with a dignity born of necessity rather than confidence. "I'll go look for work today," she told Lillian over breakfast. "There's no rush," Lillian insisted, pouring coffee. "Thomas says you're welcome to stay. I need to provide for Rebecca," Tamara cut in. "And I need purpose." Lillian nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The Mercantile might be hiring, and there's a new hotel going up. They'll need staff." Rebecca looked up from her oatmeal. "Can I stay and play with Emily?" Emily was Lillian's youngest, just a year older than Rebecca. "Of course," Lillian answered before Tamara could. "The girls will have a wonderful time." With Rebecca settled, Tamara ventured into town. Georgetown's Main Street bustled with activity. Wagons loaded with ore rumbled past. Miners in dusty clothes congregated outside supply stores, and well-dressed businessmen strode purposefully between the bank and various offices. Tamara approached the Mercantile first. The owner, a heavy-set man with spectacles perched on his nose, barely looked at her as he declined her inquiry for work. "Got all the help I need," he muttered, then added with a note of suspicion, "You're staying with the Millers, ain't you? Thomas's wife's cousin." Tamara nodded. "Heard about your troubles. Shame about your husband and the baby. Mining's a dangerous business." He turned back to his ledger. "Try the hotel. They're hiring girls for cleaning." 3 more rejections followed. The dressmaker didn't need assistance. The bakery had just taken on an apprentice. The newspaper office looked at her blankly when she inquired about any position at all. By midday, Tamara found herself standing outside the Grand Hotel, a 3-story building still under construction at one end, but already accepting guests in the completed sections. A sign in the window announced positions available. The hotel manager, Mrs. Worthington, was a thin woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Tamara up and down critically. "Experience?" she asked. "I ran my own household for 8 years, Tamara replied. "And before that, I assisted my mother with our boarding house in Denver." "References?" "My home burned recently. I lost everything, including any letters of reference." Mrs. Worthington's expression didn't soften, but she nodded. 6 days a week, dawn to dusk with a midday break. Rooms need cleaning, linens need washing, guests need attending. Pay is $20 a month, which is generous considering your lack of experience in a proper establishment. Start tomorrow. Tamara wanted to argue that running a homestead required far more skill than making beds, but she needed the position. "Thank you. I'll be here at dawn." The work was exhausting. Tamara's days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. She scrubbed floors, changed linens, emptied chamber pots, and hauled endless buckets of coal for the fireplaces. Her hands, once smooth, became chapped and red. Her back ached constantly from bending over beds and washboards. But each night, she returned to Lillian's to find Rebecca waiting, often with stories of adventures with her cousins or drawings she'd made. Those moments made the labor worthwhile. 2 weeks into her employment, Tamara was assigned to clean the hotel's dining room before the evening meal. As she polished the large mirror behind the bar, she caught sight of a man watching her from a corner table. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face that set him apart from most of the bearded miners, he wore a cattleman's clothes durable denim, a leather vest and boots that had seen many miles. She looked away quickly, uncomfortable with his attention, and continued her work. When she glanced back, he had returned to the paperwork spread before him. Later that evening, as she delivered fresh towels to the guest rooms, she nearly collided with the same man in the hallway. "Pardon me, madam," he said, stepping back. His voice was deep but gentle, with a hint of a southern accent. "My fault, sir," she replied, keeping her eyes down as Mrs. Worthington had instructed all female staff to do when addressing male guests. "I wasn't watching where I was going. No harm done." He paused, then added, "You're new here." "I've been staying at the Grand whenever I'm in Georgetown for 3 years now, and I don't recall seeing you before." Tamara met his eyes briefly, surprised by the direct address. Most guests treated the staff as invisible. "Yes, sir, I started recently." He nodded, studying her with blue eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. "Zachary Daniels," he introduced himself. "I own the Diamond D Ranch about 20 miles south of here." Tamara knew she should excuse herself, Mrs. Worthington had strict rules about staff fraternizing with guests, but something in his straightforward manner held her attention. "Tamara Adler, Mrs. Adler," he acknowledged, noting her black dress. "I won't keep you from your duties. Good evening." He continued down the hall, leaving Tamara with an odd feeling of having been truly seen for the first time since arriving in Georgetown. The next day, Mrs. Worthington assigned Tamara to serve breakfast in the dining room, unusual, as she normally worked upstairs. The reason became clear when Mr. Daniels entered, nodded in greeting, and took a seat at a corner table. "Coffee, please," he requested when Tamara approached with a pot. She poured carefully, aware of his gaze. "Will you be having breakfast, sir?" "Whatever the kitchen has ready." He set aside the newspaper he'd been carrying. "How are you finding Georgetown, Mrs. Adler?" The personal question surprised her. "It's different from what I'm accustomed to." "You're not from a mining town." "No, my husband and I had a homestead near Laramie." The words caught in her throat. It was the first time she'd spoken of James to anyone outside family since arriving. Mr. Daniels seemed to sense her discomfort. "Wyoming has some beautiful country. I drive cattle through there sometimes." Tamara nodded, grateful for his redirection. "Is your ranch large, Mr. Daniels?" "Large enough to keep me busy," he replied with a slight smile. 5,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, and more troubles than I care to count some days. Yet you find time to visit Georgetown. Business requires it." "Supplies, banking, occasional meetings with the railway men about shipping livestock." He paused. "And if I'm being honest, the occasional night in a real bed instead of under the stars is welcome." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Worthington's appearance at the dining room entrance. Her sharp eyes narrowed at the sight of Tamara lingering at a guest's table. "I should attend to other guests," Tamara said quickly. "Your breakfast will be out shortly." Throughout the morning, she was aware of Mr. Daniels watching her as she moved about the dining room. Not in the leering way some male guests did, but with a quiet attentiveness that was both unsettling and somehow comforting. When he departed the hotel later that day, tipping his hat to her as she dusted the front sitting room, Tamara found herself oddly disappointed. She told herself it was foolish. He was just a polite guest, and she was a widow with responsibilities who had no business noticing a stranger's blue eyes or the way his smile seemed to reach them. A week passed, filled with the same exhausting routine. Tamara worked from dawn to dusk, spent precious evening hours with Rebecca, and collapsed into bed each night with aching muscles, but the satisfaction of another day survived. On Sunday, her one day off, she took Rebecca to church with Lillian's family, then spent the afternoon helping her daughter write a letter to her grandparents in Missouri, informing them of their new situation. Tamara hadn't been close to James's parents. They disapproved of their son marrying a city girl from Denver, but they deserved to know what had happened to their granddaughter. Monday morning found her back at the hotel, assigned to laundry duty in the steamy basement where massive tubs of boiling water and lye soap awaited. It was the worst job in the hotel, leaving her hands raw and her lungs burning from the soap fumes. But she worked without complaint, thinking of Rebecca and the future she was determined to provide. She was hanging sheets to dry in the back courtyard when a familiar voice called her name. Mrs. Adler? Zachary Daniels stood at the courtyard entrance, leading a saddled horse. He wore riding clothes and appeared ready to depart. Mr. Daniels, she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance, hair escaping its pins, apron stained with soap and water. Are you leaving Georgetown? For now, I've concluded my business. He hesitated, then approached, leading his horse. I wanted to ask, is your daughter well settled here? The question caught her off guard. How did you small towns, he explained, news travels. I heard about your circumstances from the bartender. Tamara stiffened. My circumstances are not a matter for public discussion. No, they're not, he agreed, looking genuinely contrite. I apologize for the intrusion. It's just, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Just what, Mr. Daniels? Tamara asked, her voice cooler than intended. I lost my wife and son to fever 3 years ago, he said quietly. I know something of starting over after such a loss. It isn't easy, especially with a child to consider. The simple statement, delivered without pity, caught Tamara unprepared. She'd grown accustomed to either avoidance of her widowhood or excessive sympathy that felt like being wrapped in suffocating blankets. This matter-of-fact acknowledgement of shared experience was different. No, she admitted after a moment. It isn't easy, but Rebecca is resilient. She's adjusting well to living with my cousin's family, he nodded. Children often manage better than we expect. It's ourselves we need to worry about. He glanced at her raw, reddened hands, then back to her face. Working in hotel laundry isn't a long-term solution for a woman of your intelligence, Mrs. Adler. Tamara bristled at what sounded like criticism of her choices. It's honest work that feeds my child. I don't see what alternatives. I'm not criticizing, he interrupted gently. Just observing. You had your own homestead. You know ranching. My husband knew ranching, she corrected. I simply learned what was necessary to help him, which is more than many can claim. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small card. I'll be returning to Georgetown in 2 weeks. If you find yourself considering options beyond the Grand Hotel, I could use someone with homesteading experience at the Diamond D. Tamara stared at the card, not reaching for it. What position exactly are you offering, Mr. Daniels? His eyes widened slightly, then he gave a short laugh. Not what you're thinking, Mrs. Adler. My housekeeper is getting on in years and can't manage the main house alone anymore. She needs help with cooking, cleaning, correspondence, and occasionally keeping accounts. It would be a respectable position with your own cabin, meals provided, and $40 monthly, double what I suspect Worthington pays you. The offer was generous, suspiciously so. And my daughter would be welcome. There's a small school at the ranch for the children of my workers. 5 students currently taught by Mrs. Collins, the wife of my foreman. It sounded too perfect, which made Tamara wary. Why offer this to a woman you barely know? Zachary Daniels looked at her steadily. Because you remind me of someone who never accepted defeat, even when the world took everything. My Alina would have done exactly as you're doing, whatever necessary to protect her child. He extended the card again. Just consider it. I ask no commitment now. Hesitantly, Tamara accepted the card. I make no promises, Mr. Daniels. None expected. He tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Adler. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, the business card feeling weighty in her hand despite its small size. The offer represented something she'd refused to entertain since arriving in Georgetown, a possibility beyond mere survival. And that was dangerous possibility led to hope, and hope had betrayed her too many times. That evening, she mentioned the encounter to Lillian as they prepared dinner. Zachary Daniels, Lillian repeated, eyebrows raised. The Diamond D is one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Thomas has had dealings with him, says he's fair in business and treats his workers well. She paused, giving Tamara a meaningful look. And he's quite handsome for a man approaching 40. That's hardly relevant, Tamara replied sharply. I'm considering a job, not a husband. Of course, Lillian said, though her smile suggested otherwise. But it wouldn't hurt to remember you're still young, Tamara. 27 isn't the end of life. It is for some parts of life, Tamara said softly, thinking of James. I loved my husband, Lillian. I can't simply replace him. No one's suggesting that. Lillian touched her arm gently. But James wouldn't want you scrubbing floors and ruining your hands for the rest of your life either. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Tamara continued her work at the hotel, but found herself thinking about the Diamond D Ranch more often than she cared to admit. Not because of its owner despite Lillian's insinuations, but because of what it might offer Rebecca. Fresh air, other children, a more normal childhood than a hotel maid's daughter could expect in town. When Zachary Daniels returned to Georgetown, Tamara was prepared. She had weighed the options carefully, discussed the possibility with Rebecca, who was thrilled at the idea of living near horses, and made her decision. She approached him in the hotel lobby as he was checking in, her heart racing with a combination of nervousness and determination. Mr. Daniels, she said, stepping forward as the desk clerk handed him his room key, his face brightened with recognition. Mrs. Adler, good afternoon. Might I have a moment of your time regarding your offer? Of course. He gestured to a pair of chairs in a quiet corner of the lobby. Once seated, he waited expectantly. Tamara took a deep breath. I've considered your proposal carefully. Before giving my answer, I need to clarify several points. Reasonable, he nodded. Ask anything you wish. The cabin you mentioned, how far is it from the main house? About 100 yards, close enough for convenience, far enough for privacy. And my duties would be confined to housekeeping, cooking, and administrative tasks. Nothing improper would be expected. His expression remained serious, though a slight flush colored his cheeks. Mrs. Adler, I run a reputable ranch. You would be an employee, treated with the same respect I show all my workers. Your reputation would be safeguarded, I assure you. She nodded, satisfied with his response. My daughter must be my priority. If she fell ill or needed me, I would have to attend to her first. Naturally, I wouldn't expect otherwise. Tamara straightened her shoulders. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Daniels, on a trial basis, 3 months. If either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we part ways with no ill feelings. Agreed. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, his hand calloused from work. When can you start? I must give Mrs. Worthington notice. 2 weeks would be proper. 2 weeks it is, then. He released her hand. I'll make arrangements for your transportation and send word when everything is prepared. True to his word, exactly 14 days later, Zachary Daniels arrived in Georgetown with a comfortable wagon to transport Tamara, Rebecca, and their few belongings to the Diamond D Ranch. Leaving Lillian and her family was harder than Tamara expected. Despite the cramped quarters and her cousin's occasional matchmaking attempts, the Millers had provided safety and kindness when she'd needed it most. You'll visit, Lillian insisted, embracing her tightly. The Diamond D isn't so far that we can't see each other regularly. Of course, Tamara promised, though they both knew ranch work left little time for social calls. Rebecca was excited, chattering happily about horses and new friends as they loaded their belongings. Tamara had used some of her savings to purchase a few necessities, warm clothes for both of them, a doll for Rebecca and a journal for herself. The journey to the ranch took most of the day. Zachary drove the wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling stories about the area. Rebecca peppered him with questions which he answered with patient good humor. Tamara remained quieter, wondering if she'd made the right decision. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the landscape opened up to reveal the Diamond D Ranch. Unlike the cramped mining town, here the land rolled endlessly beneath an enormous sky. A large 2-story ranch house sat at the center of a collection of buildings: bunkhouse, barn, blacksmith shed, and several smaller cabins scattered at respectful distances. "It's so big," Rebecca exclaimed, her eyes wide. "Seems that way at first," Zachary replied. "You'll know every inch of it before long." He guided the wagon to a small cabin with a freshly painted blue door. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for their arrival. "This will be your home," he said, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Henderson, my housekeeper, has been getting it ready. She's eager to meet you both." The cabin was simple but comfortable, with 2 small bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen area with a proper cook stove. The furniture was solid and well-maintained: a table with 4 chairs, a sofa covered in faded but clean fabric, a bookshelf with several volumes, and a braided rug that added warmth to the wooden floor. Mrs. Henderson, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and capable hands, had indeed prepared for them. The fire was lit, a pot of stew simmered on the stove, and fresh bread sat cooling on the table. "Welcome to Diamond D," she said warmly. "I've put fresh linens on the beds and stocked the pantry with basics. You'll meet everyone else tomorrow, but tonight you should rest after your journey." After helping them bring in their belongings, Zachary excused himself. "I'll leave you to settle in. Mrs. Henderson will show you around the main house tomorrow morning." "Good evening, Mrs. Adler, Miss Rebecca." Rebecca, already exploring the cabin with delight, barely paused to bid him good night. Tamara walked him to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. This is more than I expected." He shook his head. "It's what any decent employer would provide. Rest well, Mrs. Adler. Tomorrow we'll be busy." In the privacy of the cabin, with Rebecca finally asleep in her new bed, Tamara allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. She stood at the small window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape bathed in moonlight. The vastness of the ranch, so different from the sheltered valley of Georgetown or even their former homestead, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Had she made a terrible mistake, bringing Rebecca to this isolated place, working for a man she barely knew? Or was this the fresh start they both needed? Sleep eluded her for hours as she turned these questions over in her mind. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and she drifted off to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night: distant cattle lowing, the occasional whinny of horses, and the wind whispering around the sturdy cabin walls. Morning came with a knock at the door. Mrs. Henderson stood there with a basket of fresh eggs and a pitcher of milk. "Thought you might need these for breakfast," she said. "And whenever you're ready, I'll take you up to the main house to show you around." The main house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Built of sturdy logs with a stone foundation, it featured a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, it was spacious but not ostentatious, clearly a working rancher's home rather than a showpiece. Mrs. Henderson guided her through the rooms with practiced efficiency. "Dining room here: Mr. Daniels takes breakfast at 6 sharp, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening. He's not particular about food, except he won't abide waste or pretension. The study where he conducts business, you'll help with correspondence and accounts in there. Kitchen's through here, you'll be helping with cooking for the house, though I still do most of it. Upstairs are the bedrooms. Mr. Daniels is at the end of the hall, 3 guest rooms and a small library." The tour continued to the outbuildings. Tamara would need to know the smokehouse, the cold cellar, the laundry shed. Throughout it all, Mrs. Henderson offered practical advice and occasional insights into the ranch's operation. 50 men work here during normal times, more during roundup and branding. Most stay in the bunkhouse or have cabins if they've been here long enough. The foreman, Mr. Collins, has the cabin nearest the barn. His wife teaches school in the old bunkhouse. That's where your Rebecca will go." "And Mr. Daniels?" Tamara asked carefully. "What should I know about working for him?" Mrs. Henderson considered the question. "He's fair, expects hard work, but gives the same himself. Doesn't talk much about personal matters. Lost his wife and boy some years back and it changed him. Not in a bad way, mind you, just made him more thoughtful. He won't bother you with unreasonable demands, but he won't tolerate laziness either." I'm not afraid of hard work. Didn't think you were, or he wouldn't have hired you. Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. You'll do fine here. And your little girl will thrive with all this open space. The first week passed in a whirlwind of new routines and adjustments. Rebecca started school with Mrs. Collins and the other children, returning each day with excited stories about her new friends and discoveries. Tamara divided her time between the main house, where she assisted Mrs. Henderson and learned the ranch's routines, and their cabin, which she was gradually making their own. Zachary Daniels was often absent, riding out early to work with his men and returning late. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a professional distance. He took meals promptly at the appointed hours, thanked them for the food without comment, and retired to his study or bedroom soon after. On her 8th day at the ranch, Tamara was working in the study, organizing papers and correspondence as Mrs. Henderson had shown her, when Zachary returned unexpectedly in the middle of the afternoon. Mrs. Adler, he said, seeming surprised to find her there. I didn't mean to interrupt. Not at all, Mr. Daniels. I'm just sorting these shipping records by date as Mrs. Henderson suggested. She began to gather the papers. I can continue later if you need your desk. No, please continue. He removed his hat and coat, hanging them on a rack by the door. I just came in to check something before heading back out. He moved to a bookshelf, selected a volume, and began flipping through it. Tamara returned to her work but was acutely aware of his presence. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again. How are you finding the Diamond D, Mrs. Adler? Is the cabin comfortable for you and your daughter? Very comfortable, thank you. Rebecca is thrilled with everything, especially school and the horses. He smiled slightly. Mrs. Collins mentioned she's a quick learner. She always has been, Tamara replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. And you? He asked, his blue eyes studying her. Are you settling in? The question seemed to carry more weight than its simple words suggested. Tamara considered her answer carefully. It's an adjustment. Different from what I've known before, but yes, I believe we're settling in well. He nodded, appearing satisfied with her response. Good. The ranch can be isolating for those not used to it. If you need anything, books, supplies, even conversation, you need only ask. The offer of conversation surprised her, hinting at a loneliness she hadn't considered he might feel. The master of such a prosperous ranch, surrounded by workers and activity, yet perhaps as isolated in his way as she felt in hers. Thank you, she said sincerely. I appreciate your consideration. He returned to his book, found what he was seeking, and made a note in a small leather-bound journal. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Mrs. Adler, there's a shipment of supplies coming from Denver next week. If you have any personal items you need, make a list and I'll add them to the order. That's very kind, but we have everything we need. His expression softened slightly. Need and want are different things. It's not an imposition. After he left, Tamara sat at the desk, considering his words. Need and want were indeed different, and she'd denied herself the latter for so long that the distinction had almost disappeared. What did she want, beyond the necessities of survival? She couldn't remember the last time she'd allowed herself to consider the question. Days turned to weeks and autumn deepened toward winter. The routine of ranch life became familiar, almost comfortable. Rebecca thrived in her new environment, making friends with the other children and developing a special fondness for a gentle mare named Buttercup that Zachary allowed her to help groom under supervision. Tamara's duties expanded naturally as she grew more confident in her role. She took over much of the cooking from Mrs. Henderson, managed household supplies, kept the account books with meticulous care, and even began handling correspondence for the ranch business. Her relationship with Zachary remained respectfully professional, though small changes had begun to emerge. He lingered longer at meals, sometimes sharing stories about the day's work or asking Rebecca about her school projects. Occasionally, he would bring Tamara books from his personal library that he thought might interest her: histories of the West, novels by Dickens or Eliot, even poetry collections. One evening in late November, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Tamara was returning to her cabin after finishing the dinner dishes when she found Zachary on her porch, a wooden crate in his arms. "Mr. Daniels," she said, surprised by his presence at her door. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong," he gestured to the crate. "The supply wagon came from Denver today. These items were part of the order." Puzzled, Tamara opened the door and invited him in. Rebecca was already asleep in her room, exhausted from a day of helping decorate the schoolhouse for the approaching Thanksgiving celebration. Zachary set the crate on the table. "I took the liberty of ordering a few things I thought might be useful." Tamara approached cautiously and peered into the crate. It contained several books, a primer for children, a volume of fairy tales, an illustrated natural history along with drawing paper and colored pencils, a pair of warm winter boots in Rebecca's size, and at the bottom, carefully wrapped in tissue, a soft wool shawl in deep blue. "Mr. Daniels, this is too much," Tamara protested, touching the shawl with hesitant fingers. "I can't accept. It's not charity, Mrs. Adler," he interrupted gently. "Consider it an advance on your Christmas bonus if that makes it easier to accept. The winters here are harsh and the supplies practical." The shawl didn't seem merely practical, but Tamara didn't voice that observation. Instead, she looked up at him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why are you being so kind to us?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away briefly, then met her eyes directly. "Because I remember what it is to start over with nothing," he said quietly. "When Alina and our son died, I nearly gave up everything: the ranch, my future, even my life. A neighboring rancher stepped in, gave me work to focus on, purpose to keep moving forward. I swore if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would." The simple honesty of his answer touched something in Tamara that had been carefully guarded since James's death: understanding. Not pity, not charity, but genuine understanding of the void loss created. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what she felt. "Rebecca will be thrilled with the books and drawing materials. She loves stories." "And the shawl?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Is it suitable?" Tamara lifted it from the crate, feeling its soft weight in her hands. "It's beautiful, more elegant than anything I've owned in years." "Blue suits you," he said simply, then seemed to realize the personal nature of the comment. He cleared his throat. "I should let you rest." "Good night, Mrs. Adler." After he left, Tamara wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and sat by the fire, allowing herself to feel its warmth and softness. It had been so long since anyone had given her something simply for pleasure rather than necessity. The gesture stirred emotions she'd thought safely buried: appreciation, connection, the dangerous beginnings of attachment. The first major snowfall came the week after Thanksgiving, transforming the ranch into a glittering white landscape. Ranch work continued despite the weather. Cattle needed feeding. Horses required care. Repairs couldn't wait, but the pace changed, turning more inward as the harsh conditions limited what could be accomplished outdoors. Tamara found herself spending more time in the main house, where additional help was needed to maintain comfort during the cold weather. She was tending the fire in the main sitting room one afternoon when Zachary returned from checking fence lines, his coat crusted with snow and his face reddened from the cold. "The north pasture fence is holding," he reported, warming his hands by the fire she'd built. "But we'll need to reinforce the section by the creek before the next storm. Mrs. Henderson has hot coffee in the kitchen," Tamara told him, concerned by how cold he appeared, "and stew for dinner whenever you're ready." "Thank you." He didn't move toward the kitchen, though, continuing to warm himself by the fire. After a moment, he asked, "How is Rebecca enjoying the snow?" "Immensely. She and the other children built a snow fort this morning before school. She came home soaked to the skin and completely happy." He smiled, the expression transforming his face. Children see the joy in winter that adults often forget. They haven't experienced enough winters to know the hardships they bring. Tamara replied, thinking of the difficult winters on the homestead when supplies ran low and illness was a constant threat. Zachary studied her expression. "You've seen hard winters." "Yes. The last two on our homestead were challenging. But you survived them. We had no choice." She adjusted a log in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "James always said God doesn't give us more than we can bear, but sometimes I wondered if God had an inflated opinion of our capabilities." The comment, bordering on blasphemy, slipped out before she could censor it. Tamara tensed, expecting disapproval, but instead heard Zachary's low chuckle. "I've had similar thoughts," he admitted, "especially after Alina and Christopher died. If that was within my capabilities to bear, I'd have preferred God thought a little less of my strength." The shared sentiment, spoken with the same dark humor she'd used, created a moment of genuine connection. For the first time since arriving at the Diamond D, Tamara felt not just understood but truly seen by another adult. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, the question emerging from a place of vulnerability she rarely exposed. "The loss." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the dancing flames. "Not completely," he finally answered, "but it changes, becomes less sharp, more, I don't know, integrated maybe, part of you rather than something that's happening to you." He looked at her directly. "I still miss them every day, but I can remember them now with more joy than pain, which wasn't true at first." Tamara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I can talk about James now without feeling like I can't breathe, and I can look at Rebecca, who has his eyes, without crying." "That's progress, I suppose." "Significant progress," he agreed. He hesitated, then added more softly, "You're doing well, Tamara. Better than you probably realize." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it, combined with the gentle encouragement, made her heart beat faster. Before she could respond, the front door burst open and Rebecca rushed in, followed by a swirl of snowflakes. "Mama, Mr. Daniels, come see what we made." She grabbed both their hands without hesitation, tugging them toward the door. "It's a snow woman with a real dress." The interruption broke the moment, but as Tamara allowed herself to be led outside to admire the lopsided snow creation wearing an old apron from the schoolhouse, she caught Zachary's eye over Rebecca's head. The warmth in his gaze suggested the connection hadn't been severed, merely paused. The weeks before Christmas brought increased activity to the ranch. Despite the snow and cold, preparations for the holiday created a festive atmosphere. Mrs. Collins organized the children to make decorations for the schoolhouse and the main house. Mrs. Henderson and Tamara baked constantly cookies, bread, pies, filling the house with delicious aromas. Even the ranch hands got into the spirit, one talented cowboy carving small wooden animals for the children. Zachary seemed to soften during this time, joining in evening gatherings in the main house where stories were shared and carols sung. He had a surprisingly pleasant baritone voice, though he declined to sing alone despite the children's pleas. 3 days before Christmas, a violent blizzard descended on the ranch. The wind howled around buildings, snow piled in massive drifts, and temperatures plummeted to dangerous levels. Everyone stayed close to shelter. The ranch hands crowded into the bunkhouse, the families in their cabins, and essential personnel in the main house. Zachary insisted Tamara and Rebecca stay in the guest room rather than risk the 100-yard journey to their cabin. "The wind could easily disorient you between here and there," he explained. "It's not worth the danger." They weren't the only ones sheltering in the main house. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Collins and his wife, and 2 young ranch hands who'd been caught near the house when the storm hit were all accommodated in various rooms. The blizzard raged for 2 days. During that time, Tamara worked alongside Mrs. Henderson to keep everyone fed and comfortable. Rebecca and the Collins children, thrilled by the adventure, helped where they could and played quiet games when they couldn't. Zachary was constantly in motion, checking on livestock in the nearest barns, ensuring the fires were maintained, and organizing periodic expeditions to check on those in the bunkhouse and outlying cabins. He would return from these ventures covered in snow, his face raw from the wind, but always with a reassuring report that everyone was safe. On the evening of the second day, as the storm finally began to abate, most of the house's occupants gathered in the sitting room. The children, exhausted from being confined indoors, had been put to bed early. The adults sat around the fire, enjoying coffee laced with whiskey to ward off the lingering chill. "I've seen worse storms," Mr. Collins was saying, "but not many." The spring of '67 was bad, lost a dozen calves that year. "This one came on faster," Zachary observed. "Hardly any warning." "We were lucky to have everyone close to shelter," Mrs. Collins added. "Providence was watching over us." Tamara, seated in a corner armchair, listened to the conversation while mending a tear in one of Rebecca's dresses. The warm room, the murmur of voices, the sense of safety amid the howling storm outside it all combined to create a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time: contentment. She glanced up to find Zachary watching her from across the room, a thoughtful expression on his face. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and something in his steady gaze made her heart flutter. Not just attraction, though that was certainly present, but something deeper: connection, understanding, possibility. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson announcing she was retiring for the night, prompting a general movement as others decided to do the same. As Tamara gathered her mending to head upstairs, Zachary approached. "A moment, Mrs. Adler?" he asked quietly. She nodded, setting aside her work again. Once the others had left, he spoke. "I wanted to thank you for your help these past days. Your calm efficiency has been invaluable." "It was nothing extraordinary," she demurred. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," he contradicted gently. "You have a gift for creating order and comfort in difficult circumstances. I've noticed it since you arrived." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. "Thank you." "That's kind of you to say." "Not kind, truthful." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The Christmas celebration will be in 2 days, weather permitting. I have a small gift for Rebecca, a saddle of her own for Buttercup. I wanted your permission before presenting it." Tamara blinked in surprise. "A saddle? That's far too generous, Mr. Daniels." "Zachary," he corrected softly. "After sheltering together through a blizzard, I think first names might be permitted, at least in private." The suggestion held implications that both thrilled and frightened her. "Zachary," she acknowledged, the name feeling strangely intimate. "Still, a saddle is an extravagant gift. She has a natural way with horses. She should learn to ride properly, and a child's saddle is safer than borrowing an adult's. It's practical as well as pleasurable." Tamara recognized the same reasoning he'd used for the shawl, blending practicality with thoughtfulness in a way that made refusal difficult. "She would be overjoyed," she admitted, "but I have nothing comparable to offer in return." "Your presence here is gift enough," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You've brought life back to this house, Tamara. Before you came, it was just a place where work was organized. Now it feels like a home again." The words, spoken with such sincerity, cracked something in Tamara's carefully maintained composure. Tears welled unexpectedly in her eyes, and she turned away, embarrassed by the display of emotion. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to. Don't apologize." His hand touched her shoulder gently. "Not for feeling." She took a deep breath, regaining control. "It's just been a long time since anyone." She trailed off, unable to articulate exactly what she meant. "Since anyone saw you," he finished for her. "Not as a widow or Rebecca's mother or an employee, just as Tamara." The simple understanding in his words was her undoing. A sob escaped her, and before she could stop herself, she was crying in earnest for James, for Samuel, for the homestead, for all the losses that had brought her to this moment. Zachary didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty consolations. He simply stood beside her, his hand a warm presence on her shoulder, allowing her the dignity of her grief. When the storm of emotion passed, she wiped her eyes, mortified. I'm not usually so demonstrative. The storm affects us all in different ways, he said, offering a handkerchief. Sometimes it breaks barriers we didn't know we'd built. She accepted the handkerchief gratefully. You're very understanding. I've had practice. He moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the dying flames. After a leaner died, I would go for weeks feeling nothing, then suddenly find myself weeping like a child because a particular sunset reminded me of her hair. He turned back to her. Grief isn't reasonable or predictable, it simply is. Tamara studied him in the firelight, the strong profile, the eyes that held their own history of pain, the hands that worked as hard as any of his men yet could be so gentle when needed. In that moment, she realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Zachary Daniels. The recognition terrified her. Love meant vulnerability, risk, the possibility of devastating loss. She'd barely survived losing James. How could she willingly open herself to that potential again? I should check on Rebecca, she said suddenly, needing distance from these overwhelming feelings. Good night, Zachary, he nodded, something like disappointment flickering across his face. Good night, Tamara, rest well. She didn't rest well at all. Long after checking on her peacefully sleeping daughter, Tamara lay awake in the guest room, her mind racing. The ease she felt with Zachary, the understanding that passed between them, the quickening of her pulse when their eyes met, these weren't merely friendly feelings. And his attention to her, the thoughtful gifts, the way his voice softened when speaking to her, these suggested his interest might be more than that of an employer for a valued employee. But was she ready? Could she risk her heart again? And what about Rebecca, who had already lost so much? If she allowed herself to care for Zachary and it ended badly, they could lose not just their hearts but their home and livelihood as well. By morning, she had resolved to maintain a friendly but proper distance. Better to protect herself and Rebecca than risk everything on feelings that might be misinterpreted or fleeting. The resolution lasted exactly 3 days. Christmas at the Diamond D was a joyous affair despite the recent storm. The main house was decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles. A massive Christmas dinner was prepared for everyone on the ranch. The hands ate in shifts in the dining room. Families gathered in the sitting room, and children ran excitedly between both spaces. Rebecca's reaction to the child-sized saddle was everything Zachary could have hoped for. She squealed with delight, hugged him impulsively, and immediately wanted to try it on Buttercup, snow or no snow. Tomorrow, Tamara promised, laughing at her daughter's enthusiasm. When the paths are clearer. Zachary's eyes met Tamara's over Rebecca's head, his expression warming at her obvious happiness. There's something for you as well, he said, handing Tamara a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. You've already given me the shawl, she protested, though her fingers itched to open the gift. That was practical. This is just because I wanted to. Inside the package was a small leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover and a fountain pen with a silver nib. Simple but elegant, clearly chosen with thought. For your thoughts, he explained. You mentioned once that you used to enjoy writing. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words that he had remembered such a casual comment. It's perfect, thank you. Later that evening, after Rebecca had finally been persuaded to go to bed, despite her excitement about trying her new saddle the next day, Tamara found herself alone with Zachary on the porch of the main house. The night was clear and cold after the storm, stars brilliantly visible in the black sky. I have something for you too, she said, withdrawing a small package from her pocket. It's not much, but he unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep gray wool. You made this, Tamara nodded, suddenly shy, in the evenings after Rebecca was asleep. Mrs. Henderson helped me get the wool from the supply room. I noticed your old one was rather worn. Zachary wrapped the scarf around his neck, feeling its warmth. No one has made something for me in a very long time. Thank you, Tamara. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the snow-covered ranch under starlight. "I was afraid to come here," Tamara admitted suddenly. "Not just because it was unfamiliar, but because, he prompted when she hesitated. Because accepting help meant acknowledging I couldn't manage alone, and that felt like failing James somehow." Zachary turned to face her fully. "Surviving isn't failing, Tamara, neither is building a new life." "I know that now." She met his gaze steadily. "The Diamond D has been good for us." "Rebecca is thriving here, and you?" he asked softly. "Are you thriving too?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond its simple words. Tamara knew her answer would either open or close a door between them. "I'm learning to hope again," she said carefully. "Which is terrifying." "Why terrifying?" His voice was gentle, encouraging, because hope leads to disappointment, to loss, to pain. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite her warm coat. "I've had enough of those to last a lifetime." Zachary stepped closer, close enough that she could see the starlight reflected in his eyes. Slowly, telegraphing his intentions so she could step away if she chose, he reached out and laid his hand gently over hers. "Hope is allowed here, Tamara," he said quietly, "even after loss. Especially after loss." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, broke through the last of her resistance. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. "I'm not sure I remember how," she whispered, his hand tightened slightly on hers. "I think you do. You hope every time you help Rebecca plan for tomorrow, every time you plant something in that garden you've been designing, every time you smile at the future instead of just enduring it." He was right, she realized. Without acknowledging it, she had been allowing tiny seeds of hope to take root over the past months. Hope for Rebecca's education and future. Hope for their little home at the ranch. And most frightening of all, hope for a connection with the man standing before her now. "Zachary," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but knowing she needed to say something, he waited, patient as always, his hand warm over hers. "I'm not ready for everything," she finally managed, "but I think I might be ready for something." Understanding dawned in his eyes, along with a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Something is a good place to start," he said. "I'm a patient man, Tamara." The Christmas stars continued their silent vigil above as two people who had known profound loss began, tentatively, to build something new together. Not rushing, not demanding, but allowing hope to grow at its own pace in the fertile ground of mutual understanding and respect. Winter gradually yielded to spring on the Diamond D Ranch. Snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Cattle were moved to fresh pastures, and the rhythms of ranch life shifted with the changing season. Tamara and Zachary's relationship evolved slowly during those months. Small gestures, his hand at her elbow as they walked, her coffee waiting when he returned from early morning rides. Shared glances across the dinner table that spoke volumes without words built a foundation of trust and growing affection. They were careful, both for Rebecca's sake and their own, not to move too quickly. Their conversations deepened, revealing more of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Sometimes they disagreed. Zachary could be stubborn about ranch matters, and Tamara was fiercely protective of her independence, but they learned to navigate differences with respect. Rebecca, with a child's intuition, sensed the change in their relationship. One evening, as Tamara tucked her into bed, she asked directly, "Do you love Mr. Zachary, Mama?" Tamara paused, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you smile different when he's around, like you used to smile at Papa." The observation, so simple yet so perceptive, caught Tamara off guard. "I care for Mr. Zachary very much," she said carefully. "Would it bother you if I did love him?" Rebecca considered this seriously. "No, he's nice, and he doesn't try to make me forget Papa." "No one could ever replace your father," Tamara assured her, smoothing Rebecca's hair. "He will always be your Papa and we'll always remember him." "But it's okay to love Mr. Zachary too," Rebecca stated with the certainty of childhood. "Papa would want you to be happy." Out of the mouths of babes, Tamara thought, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sleep well, my wise girl. As spring progressed, Tamara found herself looking forward to summer, not just surviving until the next season as she had for so long, but actively anticipating the future. She tended the garden she'd started behind their cabin, planted flowers as well as vegetables, and made small improvements to their living space. In May, Zachary announced he needed to travel to Denver on business. "I'll be gone about 10 days, he told her as they walked together after dinner, a ritual they'd established in recent weeks. "Collins will manage things here, but if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask him. We'll be fine," she assured him. "Though Rebecca will miss her riding lessons." He smiled at the mention of the child who had become so dear to him. "Tell her I'll bring her something from Denver if she practices her posting trot while I'm gone," Tamara laughed. "Now she'll do nothing else from dawn till dusk." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, enjoying the lengthening evening light. Finally, Zachary cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, Tamara." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "Yes, when I return from Denver, I'd like to court you properly." "If that would be welcome." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Court me?" "Yes." His expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. "I've grown to care for you deeply these past months, more than care if I'm being honest. But I want to do things right for you, for Rebecca, for whatever future we might build together." The declaration, so straightforward yet so profound, left Tamara momentarily speechless. Despite their growing closeness, he had never before stated his feelings so plainly. "Zachary, she began, then stopped, gathering her thoughts. "Are you certain I'm a widow with a child with little to offer beyond myself?" His expression softened. "Yourself is precisely what I want, Tamara. Your strength, your kindness, your remarkable ability to rebuild after loss. As for Rebecca, you know I've grown to love her as if she were my own. Love." He had said it, even if indirectly. Tamara felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she had kept firmly shut since James's death. "Then yes," she said quietly, "your courtship would be most welcome." The smile that lit his face warmed her to her core. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised one hand to cup her cheek. When she leaned into his touch, his eyes darkened with emotion. "May I kiss you, Tamara?" he asked, his voice low. Instead of answering, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but carried the promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, both were breathing a little faster. "I should go check on Rebecca," she said, reluctant to end the moment but mindful of propriety. He nodded, equally reluctant. "I'll see you in the morning before I leave for Denver." That night, Tamara wrote in the journal Zachary had given her for Christmas. "Today I kissed a man who is not James, and I did not feel guilty. I felt alive. Is it possible to love twice in one lifetime, differently but equally truly? I believe James would want this for me, not to replace him, but to continue living fully." Rebecca said as much tonight with the wisdom children sometimes possess. "Papa would want you to be happy," she said, "and I know she's right. I am afraid still. Love means risk." But as Zachary said months ago, hope is allowed here. Perhaps love is allowed too. Zachary's return from Denver marked the beginning of a proper courtship. Though they continued living and working as before, she in the cabin with Rebecca, he in the main house, their relationship acquired a new dimension. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides around the property. They took walks together in the evening after Rebecca was asleep, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence. Occasionally, when work permitted, they rode to a nearby lake for picnics, bringing Rebecca along to ensure propriety. The ranch hands observed the developing romance with knowing smiles but respectful distance. Mrs. Henderson, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Tamara, offered quiet approval. "He's been alone too long," she commented one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "And so have you, my dear." By midsummer, Their courtship had deepened into a love neither had expected to find again. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch of Tamara's cabin watching fireflies rise from the grass, Zachary took her hand. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his voice steady despite the importance of what he was about to say. Tamara's heart quickened. "Oh, yes," he shifted to face her more directly. "I love you, Tamara. I love Rebecca. I want us to be a family officially, permanently." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Are you proposing, Mr. Daniels?" "I'm attempting to," he replied with an answering smile, though perhaps not very skillfully. "Ask me," she said softly. He slid from the porch chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Tamara Adler, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me to be a father to Rebecca and perhaps, God willing, to other children we might have together?" Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." He produced a ring from his pocket, a gold band with a single diamond flanked by small sapphires. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "Eleanor never wore it, she preferred her mother's ring. I've kept it all these years, somehow knowing it would find its rightful place eventually." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Tamara looked from the sparkling stones to the man kneeling before her, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never expected to find love again," she confessed. "After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was focused only on survival, on providing for Rebecca. And now," he asked, rising to sit beside her again, "now I see that life continues, even after the worst losses. That the heart can expand to hold new love alongside the old." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You taught me that, Zachary. You and this place, this home you've created." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "When do you want to marry?" "Soon," she replied without hesitation. "There's no reason to wait, but I'd like Rebecca to be part of the planning. This affects her as much as us." "Of course," he chuckled. "Though I suspect her main concern will be whether Buttercup can attend the ceremony." Tamara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "She'll be thrilled. She already considers you family, you know." "As I do her," he said seriously. "I'll never try to replace James in her memory, but I promise to be the best father I can be to her." "I know you will." Tamara turned her face up to his. "Kiss me, Zachary." He did, sealing their engagement with a kiss that spoke of passion, commitment, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. The wedding took place in early September, when the aspen trees on the mountainsides had just begun to turn golden. It was a relatively simple affair, held in the ranch's main yard, which had been transformed with flower garlands, ribbons, and a wooden arch constructed by the ranch hands. The entire Diamond D community attended, along with friends from Georgetown and neighboring ranches. Lillian and her family made the journey as well. Lillian weeping happy tears to see her cousin so radiantly transformed from the grief-stricken widow who had arrived in Georgetown a year before. Rebecca, serving as her mother's only attendant, wore a new blue dress that matched Tamara's bouquet of wildflowers and cultivated blooms from her garden. Zachary stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Tamara as she walked toward him on Mr. Collins's arm. The local minister performed the ceremony, speaking of new beginnings and God's grace in bringing healing after sorrow. When it came time for the vows, Zachary took Tamara's hands in his. "Tamara," he began, his voice strong and clear, "when you came to the Diamond D, you brought life back to this ranch and to my heart. I promise to cherish you, to respect your strength and independence, to be a true partner in all things. I promise to be a father to Rebecca, honoring the memory of her first father while creating our own family bonds. I promise to stand beside you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings, grateful for each day we're granted together." Tamara's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Zachary, you taught me that hope is allowed, even after the deepest loss. I promise to bring that same hope to our marriage every day. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your comfort in sorrow, and your companion in joy. I promise to build a home with you not just of timber and stone, but of love, respect, and shared dreams. I give you my heart, knowing you will guard it carefully as I will yours." Rebecca stood beside them, her small face solemn with the importance of the moment. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Tamara tenderly, then reached down to include Rebecca in an embrace that symbolized the new family they were forming. The celebration continued well into the evening, with a feast, music, dancing, and more than a few emotional toasts from those who had witnessed their journey toward each other. As the stars appeared overhead, Zachary led Tamara away from the festivities toward the main house, now their shared home. "Happy, Mrs. Daniels?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace, "though I'll miss our cabin." "It will remain there," he assured her. "Perhaps for guests or for Rebecca when she's older and wants her own space." Or he hesitated, then continued more softly, "For other children eventually?" Tamara smiled at the thought. "I would like that," she admitted. "Not right away, but yes, children who carry both our names, both our hearts." They paused on the porch of the house, their house now, and looked back at the celebration still underway in the yard. Rebecca was dancing with one of the younger ranch hands, laughing as he twirled her carefully. "She's happy," Tamara observed. "Truly happy, not just making the best of things." "As are you," Zachary noted, studying her face in the golden light spilling from the windows. "You've changed since you arrived, Tamara. There's a lightness to you now that wasn't there before." "Because I'm not just surviving anymore," she explained. "I'm living. You helped me remember how." He touched her cheek gently. "We helped each other." Later that night, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Tamara and Zachary came together as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was tender yet passionate, the culmination of months of growing affection and the beginning of a lifetime of intimacy. Afterward, as they lay together in the moonlight filtering through the curtains, Zachary traced the curve of Tamara's shoulder with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the silver moonlight. "I was thinking about paths," she said. "How the most painful one I've ever walked, losing James and Samuel. The fire that destroyed our home somehow led me here, to you and this new life." "Do you ever wonder what might have been if things had gone differently?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think that's natural. But I've learned that looking backward too much prevents you from seeing what's right in front of you." She touched his face. "And what's in front of me now is pretty wonderful." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I used to think Alina and Christopher's deaths were the end of my story, the defining tragedy that would shape everything that followed. But they were a chapter, not the whole book." "A vitally important chapter," Tamara agreed, "as James and Samuel will always be in mine. But now we're writing new chapters together." "Together," he echoed, pulling her closer. "That's a word I never expected to embrace again." "Nor I," she whispered against his chest, "but I'm very glad I was wrong." As autumn painted the ranch in brilliant colors, Tamara settled into her new role as Zachary's wife and the mistress of Diamond D. The transition was smoother than she might have expected. She had already been managing much of the household, and the ranch hands had long since accepted her as an essential part of the operation. Rebecca thrived with the stability of their new family arrangement, proudly telling everyone at school about "my Papa Zachary," while still keeping James alive in her heart through stories and memories Tamara shared with her. Thanksgiving that year was a particularly meaningful celebration. The harvest had been bountiful, the ranch was prosperous, and the Daniels family had much to be grateful for. They hosted a massive feast for everyone who worked on the Diamond D, setting up long tables in the barn which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. As Tamara looked around at the faces, Zachary at the head of the table, Rebecca beside him chattering excitedly about her horse, Mrs. Henderson beaming with grandmotherly pride, The ranch hands and their families enjoying the abundance, she felt a swell of emotion that nearly overwhelmed her. Zachary, attuned to her moods now, noticed immediately. He leaned close to whisper, "Are you all right, love?" She nodded, blinking back tears of joy. "More than all right. I was just thinking how fortunate we are, how much we have to be thankful for." He squeezed her hand under the table. "Indeed we do." Later that evening, after the celebration had ended and they were preparing for bed, Tamara approached Zachary with a nervous smile. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Something wonderful, I hope." His eyes widened slightly, hope and question in his gaze. "Tamara, I'm with child," she said softly. "Due in early summer, the doctor believes." Joy transformed his face. He lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, then set her down quickly, suddenly concerned. "I'm sorry, is that safe?" "I didn't hurt you," she laughed, touched by his instant protectiveness. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. The baby and I are perfectly healthy." He placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered, "our child." "A new beginning," she agreed, covering his hand with hers. Another chapter in our story. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Zachary was attentive to Tamara's every need, sometimes to the point of overprotectiveness, which she gently but firmly managed. Rebecca was excited about becoming a big sister, helping prepare the nursery and suggesting increasingly improbable names for her sibling. Spring arrived with renewal across the ranch, calves born, crops planted, repairs made after winter's wear. Tamara bloomed as well, her body rounding with the new life growing within. Despite her advancing pregnancy, she remained active in managing the household and even maintained her small garden, though Zachary insisted she accept more help than before. In early June of 1878, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around the Diamond D, Tamara went into labor. The ranch midwife was summoned, along with the doctor from Georgetown who had been staying at a neighboring ranch in anticipation of the birth. Zachary paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, stopped occasionally by Rebecca's questions about what was happening. Mrs. Henderson managed both of them with practiced patience, assuring Zachary that Tamara was strong and healthy and distracting Rebecca with baking projects and stories. After several hours, the bedroom door opened and the midwife beckoned Zachary inside. There on the bed lay Tamara, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly as Zachary approached with reverent steps. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, tears filling his eyes as she placed the newborn in his arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they appeared to be the same blue as his father's. "He's perfect," Zachary whispered, touching the tiny fingers that curled instinctively around his own much larger one. "Absolutely perfect." "What shall we name him?" Tamara asked. They had discussed options but made no final decision, wanting to see the child first. Zachary considered the small face carefully. "What about William, after your father?" Tamara smiled, touched by the gesture. "William James Daniels," she suggested, "to honor both our pasts while looking toward our future." "William James," Zachary repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." Rebecca was allowed in next, her eyes wide with wonder as she was introduced to her baby brother. "He's so small," she marveled. "Was I that small?" "Just as small," Tamara assured her, "but you'll help him grow big and strong, won't you?" Rebecca nodded solemnly, accepting her new responsibility as big sister with characteristic determination. As twilight fell across the Diamond D ranch, the new family of 4 remained together in the quiet bedroom. William nursed contentedly at his mother's breast while Zachary sat beside them, one arm around Tamara and the other holding Rebecca on his lap. "I never imagined this," Tamara confessed, looking from her husband to her daughter to her newborn son. "After everything that happened, I never thought I could be this happy again." Zachary pressed a kiss to her temple. "You deserve every happiness, my love, we both do." "Hope is allowed here," she quoted softly, remembering the words that had begun their journey toward each other. You were right about that. Hope, love, family, future all allowed, he agreed. All embraced. Outside the window, the last light of day painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink. On the Diamond D Ranch, a family born of loss but built on love welcomed the newest chapter in their continuing story. And Tamara Daniels, who had once been afraid to hope, held the future in her arms and in her heart, knowing at last that love was stronger than grief, and life more powerful than loss. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Daniels family. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Rebecca blossomed into a talented young horsewoman and a natural helper with the younger children who eventually joined the family twin girls, Eleanor and Sarah, arrived 2 years after William, followed 3 years later by another son, Thomas. The Diamond D Ranch prospered under Zachary and Tamara's partnership. They expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and weathered the inevitable hard seasons with resilience. Rebecca, as she matured, showed a keen interest in the business side of ranching, often accompanying Zachary on trips to negotiate cattle sales or land purchases. And every year on their anniversary, Zachary would take Tamara's hand and ask, "Happy, Mrs. Daniels?" The answer was always the same, offered with a smile that never dimmed, completely. For Tamara had learned what Zachary promised that winter night long ago, that hope was indeed allowed, even after the deepest loss. That love could be found twice in one lifetime. That endings sometimes led to beginnings more beautiful than she could have imagined. And in the wide Wyoming sky above the Diamond D, stars continued their silent witness to the unfolding story of a woman who had found the courage to hope again, and the man whose gentle hand had shown her the way.